from. I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. I remember thinking that weekend would pass like all the others. Coffee in mismatched mugs, the sound of the old ceiling fan ticking like it always had, and my son's suitcase leaning against the wall by the door, scuffed at the corners from years of travel. He had called a few days before, said he was coming through town and thought he'd stop by. Nothing unusual about that. He was grown now, had his own life, his own schedule. Visits were shorter, more intentional. Still, when he walked in, I saw flashes of the boy who used to race his bike down this street. I'm somewhere in my 50s now, old enough to notice how the house seems to shrink each year, how silence settles heavier than it used to. I've learned to live with that. You don't fight it. You make room for it. That's what I told myself as I folded towels while he talked about work, traffic, the price of gas. Ordinary things. Safe things. We sat at the kitchen table where homework once spread out like a battlefield. The light came in low through the window, catching dust in the air. He watched me stir soup like it was something important. That should have been my first clue. When you've known someone their whole life, you sense when their words are circling something else. After dinner, we didn't rush. No phones, no television. Just the hum of the fridge and the clock that never kept perfect time. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded, eyes thoughtful. That was when he asked it. A simple question. Really? Soft. Careful. The kind of question that sounds casual but lands with weight. He asked me if I was happy back then. Not now. Back then. I didn't answer right away. My first instinct was to smooth it over, give him something easy. Mothers do that. We protect. We redirect. But something in his face stopped me. He wasn't accusing. He wasn't digging. He was trying to understand. That question opened a door I hadn't planned to walk through that night. Memories came back in pieces. Long days, short nights, choices made because someone had to make them. I realized how rarely anyone had asked me that question without expecting a tidy answer. I told him the truth, or at least the truest version I had at that moment. I talked about love and responsibility, about fear and hope living side by side. I talked about the pride I felt watching him grow, and the parts of myself I had set aside without ever meaning to. He listened, really listened. No interruptions. No judgment, just presence. In that quiet kitchen, something shifted, not in a dramatic way. No raised voices, no tears spilling over. Just an understanding settling between us, steady and respectful. Two adults, connected by history, choosing honesty. Later that night, after he went to bed, I sat alone with my thoughts. The house felt different. Not fuller, not emptier, just clearer. His question stayed with me, echoing softly, reminding me that even the most ordinary visits can carry moments that change how you see yourself. And that was only the beginning. The next morning arrived gently, the way mornings do when no one is in a hurry. I woke before him, as I always had, my body still trained by decades of early starts. The house was quiet except for the floorboard that complained under my step as I crossed the hallway. I brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching a delivery truck crawl down the street, the driver waving at no one in particular. I kept thinking about his question. It had settled into me overnight, not like a thorn, but like a stone you turn over in your pocket again and again. Was I happy back then? It wasn't a question I'd ever allowed myself to sit with for very long. There was always something else to do, someone else to consider. When he came into the kitchen, hair still rumpled from sleep, he smiled the same crooked smile he had as a teenager. He poured himself coffee without asking, muscle memory guiding him. That small familiarity made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't quite name. We talked about nothing at first. Weather. A neighbor who'd repainted their fence the wrong shade of blue. He mentioned a diner he remembered from childhood that had closed. Ordinary talk, but underneath it, I could feel both of us choosing our words more carefully than usual. Finally, he thanked me, just like that, for being honest the night before. He said he'd wondered for years if he'd ever asked too much of me without realizing it. I wanted to tell him that love doesn't keep score, that raising him had been the truest thing I'd ever done. Instead, I told him that asking the question mattered more than the answer. We took a walk later, down the same streets I once walked pushing a stroller, then holding a small hand, then trailing a moody teenager who pretended not to know me. The trees were taller now, the sidewalks more cracked. Time leaves its marks everywhere if you know how to look. He talked about his life, not the polished version, but the honest one. The doubts, the moments of standing still while everyone else seemed to move forward. I listened the way I wished someone had listened to me years ago, without fixing, without rushing. At one point, he stopped and looked at a house we used to pass every day. He asked if I ever wondered what my life would have been like if I'd chosen differently. I told him I used to wonder all the time. Then one day, I realized that wondering didn't mean regretting. It just meant I was human. That seemed to settle something between us. Not answers exactly, but permission. Permission to see each other clearly without roles getting in the way. When we got back, his suitcase was still by the door, waiting. The visit wasn't over yet, but I already knew this one would stay with me. Some conversations don't end when the words stop. They keep unfolding quietly, shaping the days that follow. That afternoon stretched longer than either of us expected. The sky turned that pale, washed-out blue that always reminds me of old photographs. We sat on the back porch with the screen door propped open, letting in the distant sound of lawn mowers and a dog barking 2 houses down. Familiar noises. Anchors. He asked if I still kept the old box in the hall closet, the one with drawings, report cards, ticket stubs. I laughed, a little embarrassed, and told him of course I did. Some things you don't throw away because they're not really clutter. They're proof. We spread the contents out on the small table between us. Paper yellowed with age. Crayon lines bold and unapologetic. He picked things up slowly, like they might break if handled too fast. Every now and then he'd pause, shake his head, and smile at something I'd forgotten entirely. A note I'd written excusing a late assignment. A photo from a school play where his smile looked nervous but proud. He grew quiet for a while. I didn't interrupt. Silence has its own language when you let it speak. Finally, he said he'd always assumed I was stronger than everyone else, that I didn't need help, that I had it all figured out. I told him strength often looks like certainty from the outside, even when it's built on questions, especially then. There was a moment, sitting there with the past laid out between us, when I felt something loosen inside me. A story I'd told myself for years began to change shape. I wasn't just the caretaker in those memories. I was a woman navigating her own unknowns, doing the best she could with what she had. He thanked me again, but this time it sounded different. Not gratitude out of obligation, but recognition, like seeing someone fully for the first time. As evening settled in, the air cooled, and the porch light flickered on. We talked about the future, carefully, without pressure. He said he wanted to visit more. I said the door was always open, and meant it in more ways than one. When night finally wrapped around the house, I realized how rare it is to have these moments. Not dramatic, not loud, just honest, the kind that don't announce their importance until much later. I went to bed that night with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in a long time. Whatever tomorrow brought, something essential had already been shared, and that, I knew, would carry us both forward. Morning came too quickly, the way it does when you know goodbye is waiting. I heard him moving around before I opened my eyes, the soft sounds of drawers and zippers. For a moment, I stayed still, letting the house breathe. It felt fuller than it had in years, like it remembered what it was built for. We ate breakfast standing up, leaning against the counter, plates balanced in our hands. No rush, even though there was a schedule somewhere in his pocket. He told me what the rest of his trip looked like. I listened, nodding, noticing how his voice carried more ease than it had when he arrived. At the door, there was that familiar pause, the kind that only happens when both people know something important has already been said, and there's no need to add more. He hugged me firm and unhurried, not the quick kind, the kind that says, "I see you." After he drove away, I stayed on the porch longer than usual. The street looked the same, but I didn't. His question, simple as it was, had rearranged something inside me. It didn't erase the past or rewrite it. It softened it, gave it dimension, allowed me to hold my younger self with a little more kindness. Later that day, I pulled out a notebook I hadn't opened in years. I wrote a few lines, nothing polished, just truths, about who I was then, about who I am now, about how love changes shape but never really leaves. I realized that happiness isn't a fixed place you arrive at and stay forever. It's moments, conversations, being brave enough to answer honestly when someone asks a real question. That visit taught me something I didn't know I still needed to learn. That growth doesn't stop when the house gets quiet. That connection can deepen even after the years have stretched long between shared breakfasts and bedtime stories. And sometimes the most ordinary visits carry the questions that stay with you for a lifetime.